Meteorologists said the weak tornado formed due to a low-level trough and daytime heating and warned of more unstable weather later this week. Internationally, in the Netherlands, a beekeeper is reeling after an arson attack destroyed 10 of his hives, killing an estimated 500,000 bees. Police say the fire in Almere's Beatrix Park was deliberately set using an accelerant and have appealed for witnesses. Beekeeper Harold Stringer says he's heartbroken but determined to rebuild his colonies, while fellow beekeepers have offered to donate hives. The incident comes as over half of the country's bee species are already threatened with extinction. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi Macnish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for being with us here on this channel on WESN. Let's tell you what we're talking about in this edition of the program. It's from an article in the last edition of the Catholic News. Your Faith, the page says at the top, and the headline is Migrants, Missionaries of Hope. Let's just tell you some of what it says. On October 4th and 5th, 2025, Catholics worldwide will have the unique opportunity to commemorate the Jubilee of Migrants and the World Day of Migrants and Refugees. This merger of celebrations within the Jubilee Year of Hope is not a mere calendar coincidence. It is a providential summons, a call to reclaim and renew the Church's identity as a pilgrim people, to stand in solidarity with those on margins, and to live integral charity through mercy in word and deed. It is also a necessary reminder that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were refugees and immigrants because they sought shelter in Egypt to avoid political persecution after Jesus' birth. In this double celebration, we hear anew the stirring cry that migrants and missionaries of hope, as proclaimed by Pope Leo XIV in his message for the 111th World Day of Migrants and Refugees. And Pope Leo reminds us that migrants are not just people who need our help, they are also people who teach us. Their courage in leaving behind country, family, and homes, their perseverance in the face of hardship, and their ability to keep faith alive when all seems lost are powerful testimonies. Well, it is an issue that we have, and we've had it, I would say, for probably most of the time of the existence of our country, Trinidad and Tobago, and to talk about bringing the issue front and center and how we deal with it to help us understand what is involved. Human rights advocate Denise Spitzer. She's agreed to discuss the matter with us. Good to see you, Denise.
Good morning, Andy. Thank you for having me.
All right, let me sort of parcel this the discussion around the fact that I would say that for us, I was thinking about it in preparing last evening for the discussion, and it struck me that I'm not sure how many of us who are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who aren't here because of people who came here before. In my case, you know, my grandparents, one came from between Grenada and St. Vincent. My grandmother came from St. Vincent. My grandfather's family came from Grenada. And right through, I mean, I'm from a village where that was the case. Most of the people who were there were people who came from somewhere. I want to start by that, talking about the extent to which we don't take that into account with some of us who challenge this question, who comes here to live or to stay or to look for a better opportunity.
Yes, precisely. Trinidad and Tobago is a nation of immigrants. I mean, I'm a fourth generation. My great-grandparents were from India, as are most of the East Indian population here in Trinidad and Tobago. And then, you know, the other ethnicities in Trinidad and Tobago, they also are descendants of immigrants. So we are a nation of immigrants. And with regards to migrants and refugees and, you know, the statements by that you just read, migrants and refugees, well, of course, they're two distinct categories, but they're both seeking, better lives for themselves and their families. They just want to be safe and secure and pursue opportunities, for the improvement of their lives, for their children. With respect to migrants, of course, migrants, their legal protection is different compared to refugees. Refugees cannot return home for fear of persecution. Migrants can return home, but that does not mean that they don't also require legal protection. And the challenge here in Trinidad and Tobago is we don't have any sort of legal framework to govern how we treat migrants and refugees. Our Immigration Act is desperately in need of updating. It still has language from colonial times. And so, yes, speaking to the comments, the sentiments that you expressed, they do deserve our empathy because the vast majority of migrants and refugees just want a better life. And yes, it's true that they embody persistence and resilience and are examples for the rest of the world, just because they're really committed to just leading good lives and also being a contribution to their host countries or the countries that they eventually settle in.
Yeah, what are some of the things that we, when I say we, I'm not necessarily talking about us, but some of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in general, what it is we don't understand and accept about that?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, what it is that we don't understand or don't accept in confronting this issue, and I shouldn't even use the term confronting, but facing up to this issue and realizing the realities as to why people move from place to place, and why is it that in a lot of cases, many of us, even the offspring of people who came here, have this attitude about who else wants to come.
So, honestly, I think everybody understands. I think everybody knows people are in search of a better life. I do think the discourse gets distorted with, political narratives. And also, I think our population is, I guess, less empathetic simply because we are also a nation that's facing our own economic crisis, the crime rate. So there's fear by the Trinbagonian population, which is a legitimate fear. And I think the perception is that now, we're not able to look after ourselves. So how are we able to look after other people, and they view them as a burden on our resources. However, it's also important to keep in mind that, and I think Trinbagonians should also, take into consideration, I think by now, most Trinbagonians have been touched in one way or another by migrants or refugees. We have we have quite a number of them. And I would say for the most part, they brought a positive contribution in terms of they generate economic activity. Also, they've developed new industries. We have now, more diversity in terms of food choices, even in terms of, the beauty industry. They generate economic activity for the public transportation. They also support the construction, hospitality industry. So they have become a backbone of our economy. So I think these are the points that need to be emphasized in terms of the contribution by migrants and refugees, which often gets sidelined with the rhetoric and the political narratives.
What would you describe what constitutes political narratives?
Well, I mean, we're seeing it around the world, right? When when immigrants are always tend to be a target around election times, because they're seen as a burden or a threat to crime, their criminal threat, and then because their voices are they're vulnerable and they don't have much of a voice as opposed to other segments of the population, they're not able to voice or to even challenge those narratives. And so, yeah, so and because they're vulnerable, they're an easy target as well, too. But I think, this is why civil society and members of civil society and even the business community, because the business community benefits a lot from migrants and refugees and the contributions they bring to Trinidad and Tobago, that, we need more voices, highlighting the positive impact of migration.
Can we go back a couple of years when there was, well, at least in our time, in this last decade, this period, this push for a lot of people coming from Venezuela. At one point, the government at the time appeared not to be sure how to deal with it, but then ultimately they put some things in place to register people as a start in accepting that these are the realities that we must face.
Yes, so that I think, was a good initiative, but at the same time too, and this is also something the public needs to be aware of, we don't just have Venezuelan migrants and refugees. Our refugee population consists of over 40 different nationalities. So yes, that was an important step because, it's a way of facilitating integration, the ability to work, to become productive members of society. And then, of course, they went a little bit further by allowing migrant children to be enrolled in local schools. But without a legal framework, these, how we treat migrants and refugees is still going to be, we still fall short in terms of the best approach would be to have a legal framework, integrate migrants and refugees into, Trinbagonian society, into the economy so that they can work, they can pay NIS, then also as well too from a national security perspective. We also know who's in the country, and then that way, if there are persons who, committed some crime, who do not, meet the threshold to be recognized as a refugee, can then be sent back legally. But without a legal framework, what tends to happen we haven't had any deportation exercises recently, but what tends to happen is that when deportation exercises do occur, we run the risk of sending persons back who are in legitimate need of protection. So, and we won't be able to comprehensively treat this migrant and refugee situation until we have some sort of legal framework that governs how migrants and refugees enter Trinidad and Tobago and then also participate in our society.
Yeah, what do you think stands in the way of a legal framework? And talk with us a little bit about what would that look like, a legal framework to address the issue?
Yeah, of course. Obviously it boils down to political will, right? Our Prime Minister, she said that there's a policy in place. They're working on some things. So of course, we're all waiting to see what that would look like. But yes, because now UNHCR is no longer, they're operating at a much reduced capacity. For example, we would now need to take over that role in terms of refugee status determination, because our RSD no longer, the RSD mechanism, in UNHCR is no longer being done in Trinidad and Tobago, which is important in terms of recognizing refugees so that they can continue to live in Trinidad and Tobago and enjoy, the fundamental rights under the Refugee Convention. Also, in part of the refugee policy should also, have individualized assessments at the border or when they declare, an intent to seek asylum, so they can be allowed to stay here and, legally stay in Trinidad and Tobago until their claim is assessed. With regards to migrants as well, too, we should also be able to offer pathways to persons who may have been here for quite a number of years, who have been working, been productive members of society, who may have got married, have families here, and allow them pathways so that they can become citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Right now, they are on the fringes of society. And when you have persons that are not fully participating in the economy and society, that tends to push them into other survival strategies that may, go outside, maybe operating outside of the law.
Yeah. What do you see, if there is any, a difference between, so we've had changes of government twice in the last 2 decades and so on this issue, is there a difference that can be pointed to about how the one regime or the other addresses the issue or seeks to address it?
I mean, both parties, both governments, they've both recognize that there is a need for a legal framework. So I know that efforts were being undertaken by the previous administration, and of course, the Prime Minister has said, our current Prime Minister has said that, yes, a policy is in place. Well, they're working on a policy, sorry, and we'll be notified, in the coming weeks or months. So I guess we just have to wait and see, what that looks like. But I think, specifically the business community should also be a little more vocal about and also engaging with the government more, because they benefit tremendously from, the migrants and refugees here in Trinidad and Tobago, because they're employing them. They support, critical industries in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, the notion that arises, at least one of them from the article that I quoted from a moment ago, talk about missionaries of hope, something about the issue of migrancy, if that's the correct term, springs hope for them and for us.
Yes, exactly. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of focus is on yes, with every migration movement, there are criminal elements. That is not unique to Trinidad and Tobago. And I think we need to place more focus on the positive aspects, which outweighs the criminal elements. I mean, even there's a report by UNODC last year where they talk about gang activity in the Caribbean, and the report emphasized that most of the criminal activities by local persons are not Venezuelan gang members. But of course, we have to acknowledge that exists. But yes, migrants and refugees, when you think of, that they leave, it's not an easy decision to leave your entire life behind, to leave family, friends, your livelihood, your home, and going to a strange country where for example, with regards to Venezuelans, they don't speak the language. They don't know, if they're going to get a job. Their lives might be in limbo. That's not an easy decision for anyone. And so we have to recognize that taking that decision, the situation has to be really, terrible for them to uproot their lives and move to Trinidad and Tobago to seek a better life. And we all know what's happening in Venezuela in terms of the economic crisis there, the humanitarian crisis there, and, the authoritarian regime, Maduro regime as well too, and how his treatment of persons who challenges his authority. We know these things. And so, we need to be a little more empathetic. We're a country of migrants. Our ancestors came from different countries, and we also created lives for ourselves here. And for the most part, we've built up Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuelans and other migrants and refugees, for the most part, can positively impact in Trinidad and Tobago. And I mean, it's also an opportunity for Trinidad and Tobago to gain a competitive advantage, because Venezuelans, we now have the opportunity to be a bilingual country. We have so many opportunities to speak Spanish, practice Spanish. That gives us a competitive advantage in the region.
Yeah, it appears at some levels to be a sort of return to the past a couple generations ago, when in fact most of the people in parts of the country spoke some other language than English. Grenada, a lot of people came from Grenada could have spoken French, and they have a patois, as they say, with a kind of French tongue that a lot of people who around whom I grew up spoke that as another language, and it spoke to the fact that where they came from, that was their language.
Yes. Yes, and that's, I mean, because all the other Caribbean island, English-speaking Caribbean, we have that advantage because of the size of the Venezuelan population here in Trinidad and Tobago, and then because of our proximity to South America, and given, that this government is pivoting and trying to, develop other markets, this can only be an advantage for Trinidad and Tobago's economy.
Yeah. What is it you say to people who have this attitude about, well, not wanting to share our speech? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
I didn't hear the first part.
What do you say to those people who still don't get it in a sense, and that there are people who's just, instinctively are against the idea of in-migration in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I mean, I acknowledge their legitimate concerns, right? Because they all, I mean, we have to acknowledge those concerns. We do have a high crime rate. Our economy is not in great shape, and so there's that legitimate fear. But then, of course, I balance my arguments with the fact that, everybody, when you go out anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago, you go to the supermarkets, you go to restaurants, even with construction, migrants and refugees, they're everywhere and they're supporting our economy. And, if we were to have a mass deportation and send them back, many aspects of our society and industry would suffer. And then they're humans just like us, this is the thing, this is the space that we're existing now, where, this othering and this binary, us versus them, when we really need to, remember that we're all the same, we're all humans, we all want the same things. We're all, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, family members. We all want, safety and security. We just want opportunity so that we can have a life, have a home, be able to, be productive members of society. And those are the things that, bind us as, as humane people, it's that our common humanity, our shared humanity is that we all want the same things. When you move past all of the discourse and the narratives and the divisiveness and the rhetoric, when it boils down to it, we all just want the same things: safety and security and opportunity, and to be able to be productive members of society.
All right, I want to come back to this issue. I want to just diverge a little bit back to your nomenclature, to steal a term here, is that you are a human rights advocate. This is just one of the areas in which you operate, and you bring your senses and your sensitivity to addressing it. What are some of the other things that form part of who you are as a human rights activist?
Well, at my core, all I've ever wanted to do is, contribute to Trinidad and Tobago and work towards improving people's lives. And some of the work that, I work on, I continue to advocate on, apart from the rights of migrants and refugees, are prison rights, criminal justice reform, prison reform, police use of force. But of course, as any human rights issue arises, of course, that will receive some attention, some advocacy. But those are the main areas. I think criminal justice reform is an urgent issue because it's linked. It's not only just about, it won't just only improve crime and how we deal with crime. It would also, have tremendous impact in terms of our development and our economy and all of those things. Because as long as, with the justice system being so painfully slow, that has a ripple effect on all of the aspects of our society.
So there's criminal justice reform, and then there is criminal reform or prison reform.
Prison reform, yes.
What are some of the highlights of criminal justice reform?
Well, criminal justice reform, it really is, I mean, for example, remand, and the lengthy stay in remand, where we have people still awaiting trial, sometimes up to 15. I mean, in some instances, there have been cases up to 20 years, which is still surprising in this day and age. So that's one major aspect of criminal justice reform. And then as well too, you know, with regards to no-show of police officers, that also has a, you know, it's a delay in, you know, appearances in court that pushes back dates. And just the slow pace of justice, you know, the different arms of justice and the slow pace of justice. And that not only does that contribute to crime, but it also is a burden on our economy when we have that inefficiency. With regards to remand, the lengthy stay in remand, 60% of the prison population thereabouts is, you know, are remandees. And the remand, which is something I've said, you know, over the last four to 5 years, is that remand is a incubator for crime. Because what tends to happen is that you are housing, you know, offenders with more serious crimes, with offenders with lesser crimes, and then you spend that time, and then there's that cross-pollination, and of course it becomes a recruiting ground for gangs as well too, and that's a real serious problem. I cannot emphasize enough how serious a problem that is for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of crime and in terms of just, you know, the pace of criminal justice, and just in terms of, you know, the development of Trinidad and Tobago. In terms of prison reform, our prisoners, that, you know, like how we treat prisoners, the regulations date back to colonial times. I think the regulations are around the 1950s, I'm not sure, which is pre-independence, and it hasn't been updated. And so a lot of how we treat prisoners, you know, does not align with modern human rights standards. You know, for example, remandees, they've not been convicted of any crime, but they're only allowed 1 hour airing time. I think that to me was shocking when I first started doing the work in Trinidad and Tobago, is that they're only allowed 1 hour airing time, meaning that they're stuck in their cell for the 23 hours, and they're just allowed that 1 hour. They have to do laundry, you know, eat, all of those things, just that 1 hour. And so that's, and then, you know, in terms of, we don't know what happens behind prisons, even reports as well too. We don't get regular reports from the prisons on the situation in the prisons. So all of these things need to change, because, I mean, while the attitude towards crime in Trinidad and Tobago is that, you know, lock them up and throw away the key, not everyone that is convicted of a crime is going to spend their entire life in prisons. Some of them will come out because based on the type of offense. And so it's important to prepare those persons who are going to return to society to become productive members of society. Also in terms of rehabilitation as well too, we need to place greater emphasis on rehabilitation. I mean, I know now remandees are being included in the rehabilitation programs, but that's a unique situation, because you're treating remandees as convicted prisoners, because it's only convicted prisoners that are supposed to be part of that rehabilitation. Why are we rehabilitating persons that have been accused? So those are some of the areas that we need to address in terms of prison reform.
And what do you see as the intent to do that, and the willingness and the provisions that ought to be there to do that? How far are we lacking behind where we should be?
Well, obviously, you know, we need to work on improving the legislation, for example, with regards to the prison rules and regulations. I'm yet to find a copy, it's not available publicly. I mean, it's a welcome initiative now that we have a Minister of Justice. That I think that's a really, really good initiative because I think we needed some sort of designated office ministry to deal with the justice system because it's such a major issue that impacts every part of Trinbagonian society. So that's a welcome initiative. It's I mean, the government, they haven't really announced too much in terms of what they plan to do. I mean, they've talked about criminal justice reform, but it starts as well too with legislation, updating, laws that align with, modern human rights standards, but also not just the laws, because the laws, they're one aspect, but you also need to establish the infrastructure to ensure that the laws are enforced properly, even with regards to police as well, too, because policing is part of the whole justice system. And, maybe, I don't know what the penalties are in terms of police and no-show, but we need to start enforcing penalties for some of these types of inefficiencies in the justice system.
Yeah, to my understanding, I don't think there are any.
No.
Getting less of no-shows, and sometimes there are good reasons why the officers don't turn up when they should, because they're involved in something else, some other activity taking place, some other movement against the commission of crime in any case. So that on a lot of fronts there are matters that ought to be addressed. And we're making some slow baby steps still. But I want to come back and close out on the question of migrants into the country and ask whether you think can there be limits on people who come to Trinidad and Tobago seeking a better way of life?
Well, I think right now we have no legal framework, so we cannot assess persons. And I think if we have some legal framework, we can do those individualized assessments. And if persons do not meet the criteria, well, then we can send them back, right? I mean, in the RSD, the refugee status determination process, you have the right to appeal once. They can appeal, and then if their appeal doesn't meet the threshold for refugee status, then they can be sent back. That's one way of then limiting the numbers that arrive in Trinidad and Tobago, because yes, the fact is we're a small country. Also, we can also engage, this is in the preamble of the Refugee Convention, is that, for example, if the burden is too much in terms of the numbers, there is what is called a burden sharing mechanism, whereby, you can engage with other states to share the burden, so that it's not so onerous in a small country, for example, like Trinidad and Tobago. So there is that other mechanism, which I think is something that has not been emphasized as much in the discourse, but that also exists, so that we can engage with other states and set up agreements where we can send refugees to other countries if we're not able to facilitate their stay here in Trinidad and Tobago. Those are some of the mechanisms. With regards to migrants, that's a different story, because, of course, if they break the law, you send them back. That's what you do, you deport them. But we need a comprehensive framework to be able to address all of these issues, and so that way we can detect persons who have broken the law and can be returned.
What is the difference between a refugee and a migrant, or a proposed refugee and a proposed migrant? What's the difference?
Right. So, right, at its core, a refugee cannot return to their home country, a migrant can, because a refugee is fleeing war and persecution, war, conflict, some sort of security threat due to race, religion, nationality, member of a social group, or political opinion, those 5 categories. Of course, now there is talk, about climate refugees. They're not legally recognized, but there is that, there's a growing conversation around climate refugees and displacement due to climate change. But migrants are genuinely just seeking economic opportunities. So that the distinction is migrants can return and refugees cannot, because of fear of security. security threats.
Yeah, but you said normally a refugee would be somebody running from hard times and and oppression of one kind or another by people in charge. But you talk about climate migrants.
So climate refugees, of course, there's no legal framework. There's no legal framework, but there was an advisory opinion that was issued earlier this year by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Inter-American Court about how we treat persons who are displaced due to climate change. Because right now there's no legal framework that governs how they're treated. So there was an advisory opinion that was issued because with climate change, as we're seeing, we're experiencing all over, persons are losing their homes, their livelihoods as a consequence of climate change. And how do we treat these persons when they have to move, when they're displaced? So that there is an advisory opinion, but there is yet any legal framework. They're not recognized in law as climate refugees. It's just that, there is now discussion around how do we treat them as displacement due to climate change.
Yeah. The people who are hands down against migrants and refugees in Trinidad, what do you say to them?
Just to remember that they're humans, just like you and I, and they want the same things. The vast majority want the same thing. They want safety, and they want security, and they want opportunity, to lead a normal and productive life, and to have a home, raise their families, have for their children to go to school. They want the same things as you and I, and they're humans just like us. And so that should be at our core when we look at another human being, is our shared humanity.
I think we could listen more to this priest, Father Stephen Alexander, when he says that migrants bring new hope to Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, they can teach us a lot, in terms of their resilience, their persistence. Also, they bring skills as well, too, and that has always, when you look at these large companies, like Satya Nadella, who heads as at Google or Microsoft, and so many of Elon Musk, they were all migrants. And look at the tremendous contributions they have given to the world, to the countries that they eventually settled in. So they want to contribute, they want jobs, they want opportunity for education, because they want to contribute. Nobody wants to live on the sidelines. They want to be, and also they don't want to be given handouts. They want to work, and they want to support themselves and become self-reliant individuals.
Yeah, so how on a scale of 1 to 10, and one side balancing the challenges of the work that you do and the insights that you have in that, as opposed to the pleasures of the satisfaction, you would say, of what happens when people like you get into action. How you balance the challenges from the rewards?
Well, the challenges are normally the pushback in terms of people, a popular response, what about my rights? And I have to emphasize, the same rights that I'm advocating for these migrants and refugees and, maybe prisoners, those are the same rights that you're entitled to. Of course, now we're facing a funding shortfall because of what's happening in the US, so it's challenging for civil society as well too. But I think it's just about having conversations with people, and educating people. And I think that has been critical in terms of softening opinions about migrants and refugees and other human rights issues. I think education is the most important thing, and having just conversations with people, listening to people's legitimate worries, and just addressing them with information, what's in the law, what's in the international human rights conventions, data, which is so important as well too, because the perception by most people around the world is that, migrants, they bring crime, but the vast majority of the data has shown in studies over 50 something. Erasmus University did a study over 55 countries, and the data is clear that migrants and refugees are 30% less likely than locals to commit crime. So, those are important facts to share with the public. And I mean, yeah, that's what you should educate people, share information and educate people.
Denise Pitcher, human rights advocate. Thank you very much. This has been uplifting in many ways.
Thank you for having me.
This has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.
WESN.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
Where good private health care is affordable.